I lost my home when my mum went away. I had no one. The one person I trusted was taken away from me.
This is the Women Beyond Walls podcast, and I'm lawyer and activist Sabrina Matani. Around the world, nearly 1 million women are behind bars, and that number is rising. Often, this is not for serious crimes, but because they are poor, because they've survived violence, or because the system failed them long before a conviction.
Stand up. We've got to stand up.
In this second season of the podcast, I speak with women who have lived through incarceration, as well as those reimagining what justice could look like. Today I'm speaking with Dra.Shona Minson, a research associate at Oxford University's Centre for Criminology. Her critical research has raised the public's awareness about the impact of maternal imprisonment on children and has shaped both policy and practice in the UK and internationally. Today, Shona talks about the unseen and irreversible impact a woman's imprisonment can have on their children. This episode is close to my heart. When I was a teenager, my father was imprisoned in Zambia for political reasons after an attempted coup. At the time, I was in school in the UK, about to take my A-level exams to determine whether I could go to university. I'll never forget seeing my mother getting that phone call, her small body shaking with sobs as she mouthed the words, "They've arrested him." My father was charged with treason, at the time a capital offence that could result in the death penalty. Thankfully, he had access to a good lawyer and was released sometime later. But that moment changed my life. It inspired me to become a lawyer and to do my part to make sure justice is a right and not a privilege. My father founded Prison Fellowship Zambia, and he continues to work supporting people in prison to this day. My own experience with my father's imprisonment gave me a personal understanding of what children with incarcerated parents endure. My work as a lawyer showed me how devastating it is when we imprison a mother, who is most often the main caregiver for children, and often the main breadwinner too. I hope this conversation prompts you to reflect and perhaps even take action. Shona, it is such a pleasure to have you on the Women Beyond Walls podcast. Your research and advocacy on children impacted by their mother's imprisonment in the UK has been groundbreaking and led to critical discussions and reform. For listeners who may be new to this issue, what impact does the imprisonment of a mother have on children?
It affects their entire life. So in the UK and particularly in England and Wales, which is where my research has focused, most children whose mothers go to prison, if they've been living with their mother beforehand, are likely to move to a new home, a new carer, because many of the women who go into prison, there isn't another parent at home to look after those children. And so children, first of all, where they live is changed. Who they live with changes. They may well then also need to change school because they might need to live in a different area. Their ability to focus at school is really disrupted, as you can imagine, by the big life changes they experience. Often they're not talking about these things because there is so much shame and stigma around maternal imprisonment. So their behaviour may become less good at school, their concentration, their focus, but nobody really knows why. And so they can end up getting into trouble more or being excluded in really extreme cases. It affects their sense of self, their own identity, their relationship with their mother because they only see her perhaps in a very limited way or talk to her. The effects of what can be quite often a very short period of imprisonment in the parent's life can lead to lifelong consequences for the children.
Sometimes I feel different, but I don't like to think of that. I want to feel normal. People don't know what I've been through. They don't understand.
That was written by Lucas, 12 years old. He is not alone in his experience of having a mother in prison. The International Coalition for Children with Incarcerated Parents estimates that at least 1.4 million children worldwide have a mother in prison. A UN study in 2019 estimates that around 19,000 children are detained in prison with their parents, mostly their mothers. However, many countries don't have systems to collect data on impacted children, and so we don't know the true scale of the problem.
There are still cases where a mother will be sentenced without a pre-sentence report, without an adjournment, and nobody is there to pick the children up from school at the end of the day. Children are left both being separated instantly from a parent with no warning, but who knows where they then end up? Who's going to take care of them? In my study, I would come across children who'd been moved around, friends of their parents or family members, and separated from their siblings, and were just kind of being moved house to house as people took on the care and then realised they couldn't really manage it, and the child would be passed on somewhere else. I remember speaking to a grandmother at a prison visitors centre who had finally got the care of her grandchild, but he'd been with other people who she felt had subjected him potentially to some very damaging behaviour. And he had regressed, he wasn't speaking anymore. He had been toilet trained, he wasn't toilet trained. And she was so heartbroken at whatever had happened.
You speak about this in terms of grief, and I think that's a really powerful word, because often I think when children experience imprisonment of their mother or even their father, it is a grief, but we don't treat it like that. These children aren't given the care and compassion or even access to counselling and therapy that we would give other children who are going through such traumatic experiences.
Yes, I was trying to come up with a concept, a way of describing what I saw children experiencing, what they told me about. And I came up with a phrase, confounding grief. And the confounding bit had two meanings. The first was that the grief was there because the child's expectations of their own life had been confounded, that they'd thought they would continue perhaps living with their mum, or even if they weren't living with her, they were seeing her, they had contact with her, whatever their relationship was outside of a prison. And suddenly all their expectations of what life looked like changed, where they lived, who they could talk to, what they could talk about, what happened on their weekends, perhaps if that's when prison visits took place. So their life expectations were confounded, but also their grief confounded society, because people do not respond to maternal imprisonment as they would respond to any other loss of a parent or loss of a mother. So if a child's parents perhaps separate, or if a parent dies, people wrap around that child. We know that children need extra love and extra care and extra support when they lose a primary carer for any other reason. Even, for example, military deployment or working abroad, there are these times and people will look out for that child. Whereas when they heard a parent had gone to prison and a mum had gone to prison, it's the opposite reaction. People withdrew from that child. So I heard from a grandmother of the child, her grandchild, not being invited to birthday parties when the whole class were invited, but he was not. Or children not being asked to play with the friends they used to play with anymore. The person who's bringing the child to school, none of the other people at the school gate talking to them. And so rather than schools and people in the community doing what we know we should do with a child who's experiencing grief, they would do the opposite. And the children should not be treated any differently than any other child suffering some sort of important loss.
I lost my home when my mum went away. I had no one. The one person I trusted was taken away from me.
This was written by Olivia, an 8-year-old child whose mother went to prison. But not only are children like Olivia left without support while their mother is imprisoned, even after their release, life can be very difficult.
And even for families where they've kept in touch really well through the imprisonment, you're asking a lot of both the mother, the child, and whoever's cared for the child, because the carer has stepped into a maternal role and the child has had to go with that and respond to that person and get what they can from them. They've had to slightly set their mum to the side. And then the mother comes out hoping to rebuild her relationship with her children. But there's got to be displacement for that to happen. And that displacement of both the person who's been the carer and the child's relationship with them, what that looks like. If it's, say, the grandmother who's looked after the children, the mother and the grandmother have to renegotiate their relationship. And there's going to be all kinds of unspoken resentments and fears and worries and gratitude on both sides. And of course, it quite often doesn't go very well. It certainly is not a smooth transition. There are women who come out and are unable to live with their children again for all kinds of reasons. And not because they didn't want to, but because they're not able to. And I haven't even talked about children who maybe have been taken into the care of the local authority. The mother comes out, she doesn't have the care of the children, she needs housing. She's only eligible for a single room because there's just her. She can't get her children back unless she has bedrooms for them. But without her children, she can't get a place with more bedrooms. So she's stuck in a catch-22 with no answer to it. I met a mother from Scotland who was out for nearly 2.5 years before she had her youngest son back with her. And at that point, the school said his behaviour changed, his ability to study. He was a much happier boy. I mean, of course he was. He was back living with his mum. But for 2.5 years while she was out of prison, she wasn't able to work her way through the system to make that happen. So we're really letting children down.
This reminds me of a little boy, Mohammed, whom I met as a young lawyer working in Sierra Leone. He was imprisoned with his mother, a street trader, who was arrested for owing money. He was a cheeky boy and brought so much joy to all the women in the prison with his laughter and naughty antics. It distracted them from the harsh prison conditions and the grief of being separated from their own children. At around 2 years old, he was taken to an orphanage. His mother and the other women in prison were worried about him, so I went to see how he was. I did not recognize the boy I met in the orphanage. He was scared, crying, and wetting his bed at night. Mohammed's mother was eventually released, but sadly, Mohammed died before his 5th birthday due to an illness. His short life was defined by 3 institutions: the prison, the orphanage, and the hospital. So many of these stories of children impacted by their mother's imprisonment are never heard. They are just a number, invisible. Yet a story we do often hear is that women in prison are bad mothers. We blame the individual as opposed to blaming the system. Can you tell us more about these misconceptions that people have of mothers in prison and how this impacts how they're treated?
Yes, it's a huge issue because women are essentially stigmatized more because they are a mother. You know, she shouldn't have committed the crime because she's a woman, and she's a mother. That's even worse. And it's going back to really patriarchal notions of women and also very misinformed and misunderstood notions of motherhood. I mean, I talk about it being a misrecognition of motherhood, where they think that being a mother is a job. It's a series of tasks. And we can say that if you were bad at this task, for example, you know, the task you have is not to break the law, and you've broken the law. So you failed that task. And we're going to say that that means you fail all the tasks of mothering. You must be bad at all of them because you did this bad thing. It doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that. You know, just because I'm not, but just say I was a bad driver. Just because I'm a bad driver would not make me a bad anything else necessarily. And so we have this label that gets attached to women as being bad mothers. And yes, of course, there are times when sometimes a woman has harmed her children, and that, you know, I don't like talking about bad mothers in any sense, but you could then understand why you might say, well, it's inappropriate for you to have the care of those children because of the harms. But to say that because you've committed shop theft, you're a bad mother is just wrong. And so we need to get away from this extra labeling that goes on and the judgments that are applied to women, and that I think sometimes mean that they are given, their crime is regarded as more serious because of their caring responsibilities. You know, the children hear this, that, well, if she committed a crime, you're better off without her. And one girl said to me, you know, did they see her do my hair in the mornings? Did they see her helping me with their homework? No, they didn't. So how can they judge?
And I think it's really important to remember here the context that drives the vast number of women into the criminal justice system, not only in the UK, but worldwide. So yes, it might be shoplifting to, get food to support her family, or even in the UK, a large proportion of prosecutions are for things like a TV license, for example, non-payment of a TV license. And across the world, it might appear differently, but really the root causes are poverty, survival. And again, thinking about how women are racialized in so many countries. And I think that sort of systemic discrimination and marginalization is just really important to remember, because we're penalizing some of the most marginalized women. We've spoken about children who have mothers in prison, but of course, pregnant women are also imprisoned. We interviewed Pamela Wynne on our podcast, who spoke really powerfully about her traumatic experiences of pregnant women in prison in the US. Recently, after tragic deaths of babies in prison, there's also been a campaign in the UK to stop pregnant women from going to prison. What evidence do we have that prisons aren't safe places for pregnant women?
How long have you got? There is really clear medical evidence that pregnancy does not go well in prison. So the Royal College of Midwives and the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists said a couple of years ago that every pregnancy in prison is a high-risk pregnancy. So no matter what the sort of health profile or demographic profile of the mother, as soon as she goes into prison, that pregnancy has become high risk. And that is for all kinds of reasons. It's because women are locked in cells for many hours with no attention given to them. It is because they are not able to access the health resources they need during pregnancy. They are more likely to give birth prematurely. Prisons don't have any pediatric resus equipment or the expertise to use it if a baby is born there. When a woman is in the third trimester, her cortisol levels are really raised because she's in prison, because she's under so much stress. And those cross through the placenta to the baby. And those can cause then long-term changes to the baby's development. And so children who experience that are more likely to have sometimes some learning impairments or other issues because of that. There's also recent work that's come out saying there's an increase for pregnant women of having gestational diabetes whilst in prison. I think there is a very, very strong case for saying there shouldn't be pregnant women in prison anywhere. And there are a number of countries have already mandated that. And you cannot imprison a pregnant woman, no matter what she's done. She cannot be put in prison. And I think that is a very important way to move.
The Bangkok rules are international standards concerning the treatment of women in prison. They underscore that imprisonment of pregnant women should be a last resort and non-custodial options applied where possible. Thanks to solid evidence, some countries are already making these changes. But if we want to see progress in other areas, we need more data. And that data then has to be put into action by policymakers, courts, and others involved. Is there any system in the government where if a child has a mother going to prison, there is any follow-up or any record keeping of these children?
We currently don't know in England and Wales. I think in many countries, we don't know how many women in prison were primary carers for their children prior to imprisonment or had a contact with their children. We don't know who's looking after those children while their mother is in prison. And if you don't know those very basic numbers, you can't create an offer to support the families, because we don't know if there are 20,000 children or 50,000 children. We don't know if they tend to be younger in age or older. We don't know if what's needed is nursery provision or mental health provision for teenagers. And so what I am hoping to work with HMPPS, the Probation and Prison Service, to do is to try to get at least some basic snapshots of that information so that we can start to build a more robust picture of the evidence, so that we can then start to say, well, actually, health need to put in this service and education need to put in this service, and housing, here's what needs to happen here.
Through your research, what were some of the other ways you saw the legal system fail children whose mothers had been arrested?
Well, if we go from if we count policing in as part of the legal system and we talk about from arrest, that's can be a real failure. Now, some forces are doing it better than others, but we did have instructions here for police that told them what to do if there was a pet at the property when they performed an arrest, but not what to do if there was a child at the property. And this is starting to get a bit more attention and change, but police forces need to think about when an arrest takes place. Is it really necessary to do it? Quite often they would do it first thing in the morning, catch a waking person. But actually the children are in the house at that point before they go to school. So there should be much greater awareness of how traumatic, how damaging, how terrifying it is for children. And if it is at all avoidable, to plan to do it better. So that might mean doing it when the children aren't there. But if that is absolutely has to be the case, then there should be a child social worker with them. There should be police officers who are trained in how to talk to children. There should be provision made for those children at the time. They should be straight away asking for a trusted adult's phone number so that they can get a familiar person with the children. But if there's a prosecution lawyer in court as well, they should understand that this is also their responsibility, that justice is everybody's responsibility in that moment. And that this is something which our sentencing guidelines say should be brought to the attention of a sentencer, and a sentencer should consider. We've a lot of Court of Appeal precedent on this as well. And so I think there is, I'm not saying it's deliberate failure on the part of the legal system, but I think there needs to be a much more conscious recognition that this is always part of every sentencing hearing. Does this person have children that they are responsible for? Where are those children? Who is looking after them? What's going to happen after I pass this sentence? There are so many things, and people have written good guides on this. And I know in the States, there are some forces that do it better as well. So the learning is out there. It just needs to be implemented. One of the things that I think should be happening is something called family group conferencing, which again is used for children in the care system or when the local authority are involved, where when you're going to change a child's home life, there is a family group conference for everyone who's going to be involved to talk about what's going to happen, to air the anxieties, to make plans. And I think that should happen both when a mother goes into prison so that it's understood what her expectations are about how often her child will come to visit her, who will bring them, what's going to happen at home, how they'll communicate. And then when she's coming out, again, have one of those meetings so that everybody is supported and facilitated to have the really hard conversations, and they're then given support to make it all work. I would love to see that happening.
I would love to see that happen as well. We have lawyers and judges from around the world who listen to this podcast. What recommendations and best practices would you suggest?
So I made a little series of films called Safeguarding Children When Sentencing Mothers, and there's one of them is available on YouTube, but I also made them specifically for lawyers, for judges, for probation. And so anyone can see the one that's there at the moment, which was made for women who are facing sentencing in England and Wales, to let them know what they should be telling the judge or telling their lawyers. And I think the big things are that the court should know that there are children. And so if you're a judge or a lawyer in a context, whatever context that is, ask your client. If you've got a woman, find out who is she caring for, then find out about the situations of those children and what will happen to them if the mother is given a custodial sentence. And there are so many women in prison globally for shortish periods of time or for things that do not need to be punished with imprisonment. When someone wants to give someone, I quote, a short, sharp shock and a period of imprisonment, but that is done without consideration for the ripple effects and the consequences. And the Bangkok rules are really clear on that it should be non-custodial alternatives that are preferred. So the court should be using, judges and lawyers should be using whatever mechanisms are available to them, whether it's a pre-trial report, pre-sentence report, or some other social work investigation, reports from children's teachers, doctors, health professionals, whoever it is, so that they understand and then choose an appropriate punishment for the mother. So if it can be non-custodial, then it should be. And non-custodial sentences should also take into account a mother's caring responsibilities. There's no point in saying that she has to be in a curfew from 8 to 8 if actually she has to drop her child at school at 7:45 in the morning. So all of those things need to be thought about as well.
That's really helpful guidance, Shona, and we'll be making sure to share your videos and other materials you've produced in the show notes as well for people who want to learn more about the work you've done. Talking about solutions, you've recently been appointed to the National Women's Justice Board, a group of experts created by the Justice Minister to reduce the number of women in prison in England and Wales. Can you please tell us a little bit more about this role and what you hope to achieve?
So, as you said, there are 10 people have been appointed to the board. It's chaired by the Minister for Prisons. And we can't disappointingly make the government do what we would like them to do, but we can give expert advice. And so we have been doing that. We will be publishing a strategic document, but we've got 4 main work streams, which are firstly about diversion. So stopping women from ever coming near the criminal legal system, because often women, it's the overspill of the lack of resource in mental health or housing or addiction services or whatever it is. And so it's trying to just stop there being such a flow of women being brought before the courts. And then looking at community alternatives. And then we're looking at 2 particular cohorts. One is mothers and pregnant women, and the other is young women in the system. And so what we are hoping is to give advice that will hopefully be then taken and implemented across government and by different departments to work strategically and to work together to try to resolve the issues that keep feeding the system, really. So what we're trying to look at is a sort of whole systems approach where the money goes where it's going to be best used, and it's going to stop women from even getting to the point of being in a courtroom where somebody is then sentencing them.
This all sounds so fantastic, Shona. And after so much kind of absence of any attention on women in the criminal justice system, I think this board is really promising, and I hope it could be something that can be replicated in other countries. Why is research so important for change? And what do you think researchers listening to this podcast can do better to work with women with lived experience and civil society?
I am still absolutely a believer in we need the evidence, we need the research evidence, and we need really robust evidence. So if we want to be able to find solutions, we need to look at the problems in a really granular way and taking account of all the facets of it. I think also research is a way to bring the voices of lived experience into different spaces where they might not always get heard. And I've been really pleased to see over the years that I've been doing research, about 13, 14 years now, that is now expected, that there should be the voices of those who have the experience from living in these systems or being subject to criminalisation or punishment should be providing expertise in all spaces. But I think that I certainly went through a bit of a crisis about 4 years ago, just post-COVID, of thinking, gosh, am I doing the wrong thing as a researcher to be asking people to share their stories of trauma and difficulties so that it goes into research work where I can't promise that anything will change because of it. All I can do is try and put it in front of people and pull levers. And for a time I thought, I'm not sure that I should, and I don't know about this. I have to say I've reached a point again of thinking, well, it is right, but actually the way that research is produced needs to change. So it should be co-produced research. It should be collaborative. It isn't about me as a researcher coming and saying, I'm going to ask you questions. It's about me partnering with somebody with lived experience and saying, how do we do this? And how do we best do it? And them advising, that them being a partner, it being a collaborative activity. So I think that for researchers going forward, please keep doing research. See where there are things that don't make sense that you might be able to persuade somebody to change. And I started seeing things change a bit, just even from my master's research when I would not have called myself an academic at all. I was just learning. But getting that research into the hands of the right people, sometimes just by determination, sometimes by luck, had effect. So I'd say it doesn't matter what stage somebody's at, whether they're an undergraduate student or they are a professor, you can do work that can make a difference.
Thank you, Shona. And your work and your participatory research is so essential for many of us who do advocacy, because we have evidence-based advocacy to rely on. And I think this is critical. I wanted to ask Shona about something she has courageously spoken about: vicarious trauma. Vicarious trauma is the emotional and psychological impact that can come from deeply engaging with the pain, trauma, or suffering of others, especially over time. It's something that's not often spoken about, particularly in the context of activism or social change work. I can certainly relate to this from my own work, especially with women on death row. But it can be very difficult to speak about this, given the tremendous suffering incarcerated women experience. It can feel as though acknowledging the impact on our own emotions and well-being somehow diminishes or detracts from the real and immediate trauma others have endured. So I asked her, why do you think it is important to speak about vicarious trauma, and are there strategies you would like to share that have helped you in your work?
Thanks for asking about that, Sabrina. Yes, I took a decision, I'm not quite sure how many years ago it was now, but after I had actually had a period of time off work and I'd been diagnosed with vicarious trauma and then received specialist trauma therapy for it. And at the start of that process, all I knew was I hated my job and I just wanted to stop. And I then had an occupational health assessment. Psychologist said, actually, this is what's going on. And I was able to realize that I wasn't well. Whereas up to that point, I just felt quite ashamed because, as you say, I thought, how can I possibly be struggling when women and children are experiencing much more awful things than I am? You know, I'm not in prison. I've got my children with me. I have a good life. And yet I really became unable to function in many ways, but I felt a great deal of shame. And so it was a relief to say, no, this is just what your brain's done really with these things you've experienced and the things you've heard. And trauma therapy really helped and allowed me to return to work. And it was after that I went to a conference of criminologists and was telling people that I'd been off work and why, and had so many people over meals go, oh my goodness, I've been feeling those things, I've had that. And I was saying, go and see somebody, get some help. And I thought, if we don't talk about this, what happens is people burn out and they leave and they stop doing research and they stop working in these spaces where we really need people to work. It happens, and in a lot of other professions, you're set up with therapeutic supervision when it's known that you're going to be dealing with traumatic things. And you have a space to debrief and offload. And that's really important. And I think that people working in this, whether as advocates or as researchers, should be having, especially when you're doing field work, should be having therapeutic supervision. So I would encourage researchers or advocates or anybody really doing this, I think, recognize that it's okay to have boundaries around what you do. So for the last few years, one of the boundaries I've had is that I don't do direct interviews with people, with women or children who have experienced severe trauma, because I know that could potentially just be a little bit more than I can still manage. And so I've worked with secondary data. There's still plenty of work to do. I'm just doing it a bit differently. And there are people who can still do those first-person interviews, and that's great. But I think it's important to know what your own limits are and to work within those, and to talk about it with colleagues, to talk about it with friends, and to don't be ashamed, don't be embarrassed. And if you're really struggling, seek help.
That's a really important point, Shona. And I'm grateful that you raise these aspects around mental health and self-care and well-being, because I think to sustain this work, we need to take care of each other, and that's really important. This work is also about building community, and we can't do that if we are broken ourselves. So what suggestions do you have for people listening who want to get involved and support this work, but especially for those who are coming to these issues for the first time?
I think it's great that you're here. It's great that you're listening. Listen to all the episodes of these podcasts and become informed. There's plenty of material out there to read about. There are women like Pamela Wynne, who you've mentioned. Teresa, I think, is on your podcast as well. Women who have shared their experiences, talk about their stories, and you will learn so much from these extraordinary women. And I think it's important for you to begin to work out, maybe if you're listening to this as a first time, what your preconceptions were about women who go to prison, what you thought they might be in prison for, what you think about their children. If you're a parent, might there be children in the school that your child attends who are experiencing this? And if so, how would you want to befriend them or support them? I think it's just starting to have an awareness that this is not a problem for other people. This is all of us. And we also can influence our politicians, our governments, to treat women differently. So become informed and then use the information you've got to make a difference in some way. And maybe that will be writing to your MP. Maybe it will be volunteering to help at a snack bar in a prison whenever there's family visits. It could be all manner of things. But yes, be informed and then become involved.
Thank you so much, Shona. Your work is so critical, and I'm so grateful for sharing all of that wisdom and knowledge with us. And we really look forward to following all the fantastic work you continue doing and hopefully collaborating in future. So thank you so much once again.
Stand up. We've got to stand up.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Women Beyond Walls. To find out more about Dra.Shona Minson and the research mentioned in this episode, or the impact of mothers' incarceration on children around the world, visit our website at womenbeyondwalls.org. This episode is edited by Human Group Media, a podcast company for social change and impact. To learn more about their work, please visit humangroupmedia.com. On this episode, we are thankful for the assistance of Laura Cook as executive producer, and to Lady Unchained and Miri for the use of their song, which accompanies all podcast episodes in the series. If you love the song as much as we do, visit unchained.org.uk. Unchained runs an artistic mentoring platform for people with lived experience of the criminal legal system. We have also used 2 clips from the BBC video, What Happens When Your Mum Goes to Prison. To watch the video in full, visit the link in our show notes. If you enjoyed this episode of Women Beyond Walls, we encourage you to pass it on and share with friends. And if you have time, we would really appreciate your reviews on your podcast platform